Welcome to the Well, Wild, and Free podcast, where the evidence-based meets the esoteric. I'm your host, Bria Hamlet. Join me and industry experts as we work through the 8 dimensions of wellness and truly uncover what it means to be holistically well, wild, and free. Let's dive in. All right, well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Well, Wild, and Free podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Bria Hamlet, and I have another special guest here today, one of my dear friends and colleagues, now in the wellness space, Meny. Ellen is an Emmy-winning TV host, author, and mental health advocate. She's originally from Baltimore, and she's worked for news stations across the country, and she's written for publications such as Vox and The Cut. Above all, Ellen loves stories, hearing them, telling them, and living them. And she currently works in DC. So Ellen, thank you so much for being on the pod.
Thank you for having me. That bio was so hard to write. It's hard to write about yourself,
I love it. I'm like, this is top tier, writing about yourself. So kudos to you. I know it's hard. Just all the accomplishments of yours and just getting to witness, for those listening, I've known Ellen for a long time now, since we were 9th graders.
Yeah.
So
it's a while.
It's been a while. But it's really cool to witness your evolution and you coming into your craft. And I'm just really excited to hear about your experience in the well-being space and how that intersects with your work as a journalist and author, all things news and story writing. So yeah.
I'm happy to talk about it.
So with that in mind, just without telling us more about what you do, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, and I love this question. It really makes me think beyond my career. So I would describe myself as a funny, which I have a hard time describing myself as such, because I feel like I become kind of a fraud when I say I'm funny, I'm smart, I'm earnest, I'm kind. I would describe myself as someone who loves creative pursuits, who tries to live life in a joyful way. And I try my best to bring just a sense of happiness to my life and the world.
I love that. And also, it's funny that you... there's any weird feelings at all about you saying that you're funny. Ellen is hilarious.
Thank you.
Anybody listening, truly, honestly, one of the funniest people I know and has always been a funny person. You know how there are some people where it's I had no idea. You have through and through always been just a comedic brilliance to me, and your timing and situational awareness. I think that's also a big part of it too.
Thank you.
So please wear that proudly.
I will.
And so being in the space that you're in, given that you have this background in writing and storytelling and what you've seen, how would you define well-being, knowing what you know now?
Absolutely. So I think well-being is the ability and the opportunity to be at home with yourself in various situations. I think well-being can shift depending on one's current situation, be it being in a great place in life, being in maybe a not so great place in life. But ultimately, well-being is the ability to feel comfortable with oneself and feel grounded, and at the same time kind of weathering the storms as they come. So it's kind of this shifting ability to maintain a certain level of comfort and familiarity with oneself.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Comfort and familiarity, while everything around you is also changing. It reminds me of a saying in yoga that I'm most certainly going to get wrong, but a teacher of mine expressed that you're basically looking for the ability to ground like a tree with roots, but at the same time trees sway with the wind. So you're grounded, but you're still able to move and adapt without breaking and falling. And so it sounds like that's kind of what you were getting at, of this ability to you're grounded, you're here, but you're still able to sort of
move or just adjust.
Yeah, maneuver, adjust. There we go. I'm what is the word? Like, not shelter. Trees provide shelter, but you're not sheltering from them. Well, maybe you are. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like you are, and you're
Yeah.
swaying, you're sheltering. To me,
Mm-hmm.
so I love that saying. One of my sayings in life that I usually use is "This too shall pass," which is a very transient saying, which suggests that, well, bad times will pass, but also good times will as well, and to kind of keep that in mind as you navigate life. And it's a little depressing, but it's yeah, I mean, I think it inspires me to just kind of cherish moments, but also understand that certain moments will pass if they're bad.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Nothing is going to remain the same. Like, that's the only constant. And so I think, although it might sound depressing, it's also like, we wouldn't know good if we didn't experience bad.
Ooh.
So I think that that's a really like healthy approach to it. Like, I'll be present and enjoy this thing while it's here. And when the shitty thing's happening, I will wait it out.
Exactly.
Just going with that. So I appreciate your wisdom there. Going back a little bit, just thinking to when you were younger, what was your relationship to health and well-being like?
I didn't really have a strong relationship with well-being as a child. I think that wasn't something I thought about. And I don't know if it was our generation or just the idea of being a child that you don't really think, how am I doing? Do I feel grounded? What can I do to make myself feel better? What are those self-soothing mechanisms? I didn't have that as a kid. And so I think I just did things that made me feel happy and good, and in a way that contributed to my well-being. So like, I'm a writer, as we've mentioned. In middle school, I wrote a huge amount of fan fiction about Pokemon.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
a real big nerd. But, it brought me a lot of joy. And so I think when I was younger, that's how I achieved a sense of well-being. And, as I've gotten older, that's changed. I don't write fan fiction anymore, but I still write.
I love that. I love the willingness to think about, like, yeah, maybe it wasn't a conversation in the way we talk about well-being now, but like, you were committed to doing things that made you happy, which I think for kids, one, that's really that's all I want them to worry about. It's like, do the thing that brings you joy. But also the outlet, like that you had a creative outlet, I think is a thing that a lot of us as adults move away from. We tend to lose that sort of like spark.
True.
Or the spark becomes the thing that makes us money. And then it becomes like a convoluted sort of like, I love this thing, but also now there's stress behind it.
Oh, don't I know it? Yep.
It's a delicate balance, but I appreciate you reflecting in that way. And, for folks who are listening, you might have gathered, we're going to be talking about emotional well-being today. So of course, with the dimensions of wellness, there's 8 different ones, and emotional well-being is just one facet. And the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, define it as the ability to successfully handle life's stresses and adapt to change in difficult times. So we've talked a little bit about that already, but thinking about, what it means to be in a career that's so front-facing in Ellen's case, and a little bit in my case as well, having to keep a really clear view of what's going on emotionally for you is important. And I think also in the work that we do, we see other people's emotions a lot, even though we're in pretty different industries. And so very excited to hear like your insight, and also with more of the work that you've done to bring mental health into the conversations that you're having with folks. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going to pivot into our Show Me the Stats segment of this show.
I love that. Show me the stats. It's like, show me the money.
Yes. Show me the stats. So I could not be a proper like public health stewardess if I didn't bring data into this. I love data.
I love data.
Yes. It's how we know like somebody's measuring something somewhere. And so in thinking about talking about this with you, there's a lot of emotional well-being data. There's a lot of mental health data. And I really wanted to dial into what we know about journalists given your work. And so the first stat goes a little bit like this. The Chilling, a global study of online violence against women journalists, published by the International Center for Journalists in November 2022, is a 3-year study among 1,100 participants covering 15 countries, including the U.S. And they found that 73% of their respondents identifying as women experience some level of online violence, whether that's obviously with online violence, we're talking more verbal, we're talking like images and things. And just in your initial reaction to thinking about the well-being of journalists, particularly as we've moved way more into the digital space than we've ever been, how does that land for you?
I mean, that lands right on the mark for me. Back in 2017, I wrote an article that got picked up by Vox about the sexual harassment many women journalists face, specifically journalists in my industry, which is local television broadcasting. And so, when I put out a call for stories about it, I mean, so many people reached out to me. And so, I have also heard of that stat, just the overwhelming violence against female journalists or women in journalism is unsurprising, but also remarkable. And so I do think a variety of people, like not just women journalists, but I think, LGBTQ journalists, Black journalists, journalists of color, they all face a huge amount of, I think, stress in that regard. And it does take more navigation to deal with the emotional, I'm blanking on the word, but it's a lot to deal with.
Fallout, the daily. Yeah, absolutely. That startled me. Like, I mean, I know it's one of those things where we always hear, 1 in 3, 1 in 2. And so I don't know why it surprised me, but I think just seeing that 73%, I mean, we're talking of the majority, the vast majority of people are experiencing something. And we're talking over the entire globe, 15 different countries, including the US. And it kind of makes me think about culturally that there are certain behaviors that have been just kind of like accepted as part of the job.
Right.
And it made me think, is like, oh, is this another one of those like part of the job things where you're in media, there are a lot of trolls, right? And especially if you are in a role where people are going to be able to almost like comment on your performance without ever having to interact with you. So like, news is now on social media. Right. People can comment and they can see you in your day-to-day life, whatever you choose to share on whatever platform. And it makes them feel like they have access to you. And it seems like their response is often like, just don't feed the trolls. Like, they're like, just don't feed the trolls. But it's like at one point, the same way we have conversations about sexual assault, like at what point do we say like, or don't troll? Like these are like, and how do we challenge that? It definitely cracked my mind open of like, oh yeah, this touches every industry, because it certainly happens in the yoga space too. Right. Unfortunately, there have been times where I've taken posts down because the comments just got out of control, and it was kind of like, I'm trying to do this thing over here and you're trying to make it something else. And it's just disappointing to hear, because journalism is so important, in particular, the perspective of, women and other marginalized journalist voices. So
I agree. And I do have a huge amount of beef with the concept of don't feed the trolls, because on one hand, I agree that, yes, in a way, if you don't really feed a troll, it might deter them. But on the other hand, I understand, I'm sure you do, the desire to fight back. And I think it does remove some power from the victim when it's like, oh, just be quiet and don't say anything and they'll go away. It's kind of like the schoolyard concept of the bully, don't fight back against the bully and they'll go away. So yes, I mean, I agree that instead of I wish the narrative would go from don't feed the trolls to why is this person trolling? Why is this accepted or just considered part of the job?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Challenging all of it. Like, why is this become normalized? And also what is a true feasible pipeline for dealing with folks who do this? And I think we're starting to see that happen with other forms of online hate. But it is interesting, the specific, vulnerabilities that journalists face all over the world, telling, very important news. With that in mind, I do have another stat for you. So
I'm ready.
All right, on to stat number 2. So the COVID-19 pandemic shined a light on many things, one in particular being the reception and treatment of journalists. Depending on their beats or work locations, 4 to 59% of journalists have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, according to the DART Center, which advocates for better media coverage of trauma and researching the psychological impact of reporting on traumatic events. And this is coming from the Journalist Resource. So have you heard that stat before? What are your thoughts?
So I haven't heard the stat about COVID just because I haven't kind of done my due diligence recently about journalists' mental health. But I mean, I have seen stats on journalists and PTSD, and I think it would make total sense that once we hit COVID and, as we move through that, journalists would face more and more PTSD. I think in the past, there was this, adage within the world of journalism that we are people who are observing horrible things. And, we go and cover murders and mass shootings and just, as I said, horrible things. And you go home at the end of the day and you suck it up. And which is just so backwards to me now. But it was kind of, as we talked about before with harassment, it's just part of the job. You signed up for it. And now I am happy to see that more and more journalists are talking about the toll that the industry takes on mental health. Mm-hmm. And I am not shocked. I mean, I wasn't, once we hit COVID, I was no longer in the world of hard journalism. I went to lifestyle content and kind of more feature storytelling, which is a lot less stressful. But I definitely walked away from journalism with some PTSD from certain stories I covered. So I believe that 110%.
Was that an intentional walk away, like an intentional switch from, or was it more of like the opportunity presented itself to explore something different and you moved in that direction?
It was an intentional switch. I really am very passionate about journalism and, the need to bring crises and truths and important things to light. But ultimately, I just found myself enjoying the ability to tell stories of a lighter nature more. I still feel like I can impact people's lives by showcasing what they do and telling stories about them. But I think I have more creative freedom and I think I fit into that world better.
I love that. And I also love you chose you, which is important. Like we don't all have to do everything, right? But we all have to do something. And there is a very important place in my heart, and I think many people's hearts, for the lighter-hearted, the lifestyle sort of aspects of things, because it can't be all doom and gloom, because you will feel like there is literally nothing but doom and gloom in this world. And I think, we've lived through a lot of events, in our in our lifetime. And I know, many folks have, but because we're so connected, it's just coming off rapid fire. Definitely. Like, not to like completely timestamp ourselves too much, but like yesterday I was at Universal Studios and my cousin goes, "Oh my gosh, the lead singer of Smash Mouth died." And I'm like, which is so sad in general, just like off my little like 90s kid heart, just,
I know.
Definitely shed it. Just so sad. Yeah. I know. No, I feel bad for laughing, but I feel like he would love that.
That's true. He was a fantastic musician.
Yes, absolutely. And but it goes back to the thing of like, I'm in an amusement park. I'm so like detached from, I'm not thinking about the news, but the news is here and it's in our pocket. We see it all the time. And so I can only imagine going from consuming it to reporting on it, the mental gymnastics of having to come home and then be like, where do I put these feelings?
Yes. Absolutely. And for me, it was just being very intentional about boundaries and diversifying what I consume in terms of news and any kind of content. It took, I think, very specific action on my part.
That's good. And it's nice to see that that's happening. And that's actually a great segue into my questions for you, one of which is, as a public figure, how do you combat, online and in real life, trolls and sort of the negative feelings that come with, potentially talking about a story that's heavy?
Absolutely. Oh, the trolls. I mean, I think I navigate it two ways. So the first way is if it's just a trollish comment about my appearance or my clothing or whatever, I just like to think that person really took time out of the day. They booted up their computer. They logged onto Facebook or whatever. They typed on a message. They saw me and they said, I'm going to make this woman's day worse. Typed on a message, posted it. And that's how they spent 15 to 30 minutes of their sad day. And I just see them as honestly just kind of sad and miserable people. Because who else would take the time to hate on someone who they don't really know and who hasn't really done anything wrong?
Truly.
I mean, you've been in that situation too, and
sadly,
yes,
yes, it's that's such a beautiful and I think self-aware approach to thinking about folks online. Like there is a person behind that message, and that person probably is sad or mad or they have no other outlet, and so this is the outlet that they're using. It's like, this isn't really about my outfit, Cheryl. Like we both know, like, this is not.
Get out of here, Cheryl.
Right? Like, go take a walk, maybe have some water, and then like regroup. And I think it's important to remember that a lot of times people's behavior is a reflection of like what's going on with them. I certainly have had my fair share of like rogue comments. And a lot of times they're so outlandish, it's kind of like you can't help but be like, this person is having a really bad day. Similarly with like reviews, for example, getting reviews on classes. I had a person who wrote a review once, and it was exactly that thing of like, this person had to spend a solid 30 minutes writing this.
Oh gosh.
And why they decided that this was worth their precious 30 minutes of lifetime and breathing is beyond me. But it was so beyond the initial shock of just like, wow.
Right.
I was like, and now I feel sad for you. And that's, where I was able to leave it. But it is hard because a lot of times it's so unwarranted. Like, you're having a good day, you're just hanging out, and all of a sudden it's like,
Cheryl starts talking about, the sweater you wore or something completely out of pocket.
Yes. And it's also the thing of like, yes, we are connected, right? And it's beautiful that we're connected. That's really good for our social well-being. And also like being connected to someone or following someone online does not mean that you are now free to just say whatever you want to this person or about this person. And I do feel like when it comes to digital boundaries, that's such a wonky thing because people feel like they know you. And they're like, I know Ellen, I can tell Ellen I was not into that dress she wore this morning. And it's kind of like, but you don't. And also, what do you think is going to happen by you making this comment? Like, the news has happened. It's already, the day has happened.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I am always fascinated by the concept of parasocial relationships with online personalities / TV personalities, just because I am one of those people, as are you. And it's interesting to me because I've had to enact some really hard boundaries in certain ways. I tend to be a pretty friendly person. I like engaging with people, but I've learned over time that if someone becomes way too familiar with you and they don't know you, it's okay to hit the block button. It's okay to get them out of there. Even if you hurt their feelings, you gotta be selfish sometimes. And it's not, selfishness isn't necessarily a bad thing in certain situations.
Not at all. I am a big fan of the block button.
Oh, yes.
Big fan. Because at this point, it's like I'm protecting my peace. And I remember I asked my therapist, like, is it non-confrontational of me to just like block this person and not try to say something meaningful and like challenge their thought process? And she's like, do you have time in your day to offer that level of counseling to this complete stranger who is trying to hurt you? And it's like, no.
Wise therapist.
I don't. Right. I'm like, you're right. I don't. It's very different than trying to have a complex conversation with someone who I love or care about or someone in my circle. Like, if it's truly just a rogue stranger, I'm good. And this came up a couple weeks ago with I'm in an ad right now that's running, and it's an ad specifically for like a women's health supplement. And I got a comment from someone who, and there's so many layers to why this was like really out of pocket, but this person was insinuating that I was, in the best case scenario, this person was assuming that I was, I guess, transgender or gender nonconforming. But they were trying to insult me by assuming that, by using pronouns that are not my pronouns. And from a logical standpoint, it didn't make sense given the context of the product. But it also was like, what if I was an actress and that's what I was getting paid to promote?
Right.
You know, like all of these things. And I had to sit with the feelings of like, this person said I sounded like a man, which is such a funny, like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Right. And then I had to sit with the feelings of like, why am I uncomfortable? And it's like, it's not because they think I sound like a man, whatever that means. And it's not because they're trying to insinuate that I am, trans. It's that they are trying to use that as a like act of violence towards me, which is violent towards the entire, trans and gender nonconforming community. And also in a way violent towards me, because now you have all these people in the comments who are like, what's going on here? And it creates a problem, in so many ways. And it speaks to a larger issue that we already have in our society. And so like, even then, it's like, I want to be mad because this person's being ignorant. And also like, there's a social responsibility to how I respond to this ignorant comment. And I ultimately ended up not responding to that person because thankfully some other good Samaritans in the comment section were like, basically you're being ridiculous. Yeah. Somebody else is like, she has a beautiful voice, which it was never about the voice. Kind of the same thing. It's like, it's never about the dress.
It's never about the dress. It's never about the voice. And it's just... Yeah. Things like that are so vile. I mean, I think there are levels of trolls. You have Cheryl with the sweater, and then you have all the way to whoever this was, who is just, vile on a number of levels. Mm-hmm. And I think each troll not deserves, but I think you have to face each troll differently because they're different beings. I mean, they're people, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Different monsters.
Yeah. Different monsters, different agendas. I totally agree. And I think if you have the bandwidth to pick and choose those battles, like if you really want to have that conversation and you can do it tactfully, I've seen some people do it so well. Like I think watching Jessamine Stanley handle trolls has been really beautiful. For those of you who don't know, she's a world-class, wonderful yoga instructor who lives in a bigger body and has dealt with a lot of trolls for that reason. It's been really cool to watch people deal with them. And even like a friend of mine from San Diego, she's also a journalist, Samantha Rivera, dealt with like a literal in-person, did you see this? Where she was reporting at a sporting event. I can't remember what sport, but a guy tried to get in her face and she literally had to like, yes.
Oh my gosh, she was my hero.
She is a wonderful human being. And also like, I hate that had to happen. And also I love that she was literally like, nope. Nope.
And I mean, I love a good, strong arm push, whether that is metaphorically or physically. Yeah. But I'm blanking on what I was gonna say. But yeah, trolls. There's been okay. Well, hold on. I know what I'm gonna say. I think maybe 2 times out of 10, there is the opportunity for someone to change. I have been in scenarios where I've confronted a troll and they've genuinely apologized. On some level, they didn't know what they were doing, or they thought we were closer than we anticipated, or they anticipated. So I do think that's possible if someone has the bandwidth. On the other end, I have straight up emailed people's jobs and said, hey, did you see your employee sexually harass multiple journalists? That's interesting. And so yes. I'm all about range.
Yes. I forget that is a tool. And for people listening, just remember, like, you don't have to necessarily always handle the issue yourself. Like, part of the emotional preservation is like, what do I have the bandwidth to do? Yeah. And I love a strongly worded email to the right person. Like screenshots, send them on their merry way, because ultimately, like, people forget the same way I'm a person that you feel like you know all of these things about and you feel like you can comment. You are also a person with things that you should be concerned about protecting. And so let's all just not, bother each other in such a horrific and unnecessary way. So
absolutely.
I love, those are great strategies, great notes.
I try.
And even so, with more great notes, I'm sure you have some. What are your tricks of the trade as far as taking care of your emotional well-being as a journalist? What are things that you like to do?
Absolutely. So to me, I like to call it my anxiety toolbox. So I've been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. And so through the years of therapy and education, to me, I think one of the biggest things in relation to my job is maintaining healthy and hard boundaries. So I think more and more our generation, and especially our industries, are really keen on just working 24/7. I think that's not the fault of the employee. That's really the fault of kind of the industry or the corporation. But it's becoming more and more common for people to work beyond their hours or work beyond their pay scale. And I could go down a rabbit hole with that. But the point is, I work, I will work my hours and I will get paid for every single hour I work.
Yes.
Yes, and on the other hand, I've discovered over time that I simply can't work 24 hours a day. I need to take mental health breaks or else I just become not a great person. I mean, I just, I get freaked out. And I'm not feeling mentally healthy if that happens. And so keep maintaining those boundaries is very important to me. And then on the other side of things, just trying to keep a schedule. I love running, and so that's big for me. When I'm feeling that I'm struggling with any kind of life circumstance, getting in touch with a therapist and making time. And I know not everybody has that opportunity or the finances or the time for a therapist. So I am really lucky in that regard. But those are just some of the things that keep me happy and healthy.
Yes. Thank you for sharing those. And for anybody who is looking for some sort of counseling or therapy, I will be putting resources for low cost and free therapy services, because I know that they are not always easy to find. And that certainly does not solve the larger issue we have around the accessibility of mental health care in this country in particular. But by all means, like therapy, if you can afford it, if you have access to it, talking to someone, I am a huge believer in that. And I love what you said about boundaries with work. Yes. We were just talking about boundaries with people online, but also like the separation. When you are in a front-facing role, it can feel like the second you post on social media, you're on the clock. And there's this expectation that you're going to do completely unrelated things. I don't know if you've experienced this, where like I might post that I'm going to like get coffee and I'll get like a DM about an email. And I'm just like, oh, I had to actually close my DMs to people who I'm not following for that reason, because it was like, hey, that stays over here. This is me just getting coffee,
right.
And so, and on the flip side, making sure that the time that you are working, you're getting compensated for, and then having that hard stop. I imagine it's tough when you have I wouldn't even say if it's a non-traditional job, but when you don't have a 9 to 5, it makes it that much harder to figure out like, when am I stopping? When am I not working? Especially because you're constantly consuming and you have ideas and et cetera. I love that you're conscious of that and implementing those boundaries.
Thank you. Yeah. And I would say for me, it's kind of impossible to totally turn off from my job a lot of the time because, and this is a good part of it, I am always looking for stories. And so if I'm on TikTok and I see something happening, I'm of course going to consider, oh, this would be a great story for work. But I think, trying my best to maintain good boundaries and turn my brain off allows me to perform better at work and be a better storyteller.
So true. So true. I think I saw someone recently say, like, have like a little like notepad or something where you like, oh, I have this idea, I'll write it down, and then like putting that to the side so you can continue to engage in your self-care time. And, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, tricky thing when you're doing something that requires so much creativity and inspiration and literal finding of stories. So I commend you for knowing that and also still practicing healthy boundaries. And then thinking about that, so you've also spoken for NAMI as a mental health speaker. So you've done a lot of awareness building work around stigma and also just talking really transparently about your own experiences with mental health, which I love and appreciate. What's something that you wish more people understood about mental illness?
Oh, I wish so many things. I think there's always opportunity to learn about mental health and mental illness specifically. I think the top two things are, one, that really everyone has mental health. not everyone has mental illness, but a lot more people than I think it's much easier to have a mental illness than people think.
Yes.
I actually really like using the term mental illness. I know some people are not a fan. I feel very comfortable with it. I think because it's like, well, it's physical or mental, it's the same deal. And it's all encompassing. I also use mental health condition, but I think a lot of people, maybe in older generations, but definitely people in our generation as well, think that, I don't have anxiety. I don't have depression. I'm totally fine. Just sometimes I sob uncontrollably for 2 hours, or sometimes I have to count the number of times that I turn the doorknob, or all of my family will die. Like, people, sorry, that's very...
No, yeah. No, it's real. It's like you have to laugh to almost to like keep from crying of like, yes.
Right. And so I think people might not always recognize the signs of a mental health condition. When they think of mental illness, they think really, really big, as opposed to some of the smaller, symptoms that someone could have. On a similar note, another thing I wish another thing that I see people doing that's always been interesting to me is whenever I brought up in various environments that I have anxiety and I also am a television host, people say, wow, that must be really hard. You're talking to people all the time. Or that must be very stressful for you to do that job with anxiety. And it's kind of a similar note that, well, there's a big difference between generalized anxiety disorder and social anxiety. I love talking to people. I feel very comfortable on stage or presenting or performing. And so I think people tend to equate certain things with a catch-all. Like if someone is anxious, they're going to be afraid of everything. If someone is depressed, they're going to be crying and sad all the time, when it's definitely much more nuanced than that.
Both of those points are super, super important. I'll circle back to what you were saying about the idea of mental illness, this idea that it's this extreme sort of like, if you have a mental illness, you are really, really, really struggling. And I think about even just going back to like the idea of growing up and what it meant to be well. Like in our hometown, there's a well-known mental health facility. And like when I would hear the term mental illness, I immediately thought of like that.
Right.
Facility.
Yes. Oh, I totally know what you're talking about.
Yes. It's like, that's immediately, it's like, oh, they had to go like there. Like, and just the stigma of that. And I know many, many people who had to get, who were either admitted to or got services from said facility, and they needed it and they deserved it. And they didn't deserve to then come back to school. And it was like what's going on with that person? And so that culture, I'm happy to see that this culture has shifted, and also people still kind of try to keep themselves in an arm's distance. I know specifically like in the Black community, it's still kind of a thing of like, we don't love to talk about mental illness or disorders or whatnot. But then there's always someone who's like, yeah, my cousin was a little touched or a little weird. And it's like, this person probably is struggling with something that was never properly diagnosed, or perhaps we didn't even have the diagnostic tools when they were coming up and it never got diagnosed. And it makes me think about a lot of those facilities. I watched a documentary the other day about, one of those asylums that got shut down, and how sad it is to me to think that people with things like OCD were being sent, like literally locked away to never be seen again for something that is very treatable and that you very much can go on to live an average life. Many things you can with medication. And it's just interesting to me that, like you said, people kind of still try to keep an arm's distance, but it really is an illness. And if you treat it as such, kind of like the same thing when you're having a hard mental health day, if you treat your body like you're having a hard physical health day, your mind will start to respond to that treatment of self-soothing, regulation, etc. And also, like, if you need medication, by all means, please take the drugs.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things I've noticed, not to like go on a tangent or anything, but here we go, is that I think now I agree that we're getting better and better at representing mental health conditions and being vocal and more nuanced about mental health. But in my experience as a, I guess, mental health advocate, I'll call myself, even now, it's much more socially acceptable to get up in front of people and say, I have anxiety or I have depression, as opposed to getting up in front of people and saying, about a year ago, I started looking in the mirror and believing I had a rare disease. And so I would have to look in the mirror every hour and make sure that the disease wasn't progressing. Like I've been diagnosed with health anxiety as well, which is a form of OCD. And it's well maintained. It really doesn't happen anymore, but that genuinely happened to me. And I'm being very candid when I say it's a lot easier for me to stand up and say I have anxiety and look at me, as opposed to let me really get into the nitty gritty, because I still think when we discuss specific things like that, or things beyond anxiety and depression, like OCD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, so on and so forth, people still, I think, are very biased against those specific things. And so I do think it's been getting better, but we have a ways to go still.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like you said, it's almost like, dare I say, like trendy. Like when someone's like, oh, I have anxiety. It's like, oh, me too. Like, well, yeah, many people have forms of anxiety, but generalized anxiety disorder is very different than social anxiety. And I think it's similar but different. But what we're seeing with like the self-diagnosis of ADHD that has happened with the advent of TikTok. And I'm someone who is formally diagnosed with attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And so it's always interesting to me when people are like, oh, I'm having an ADD moment and not really understanding what it means to live with it versus thinking you're having a forgetful moment or a inattentive moment. Like, in the spirit of vulnerability, I'll share that, like, before I was diagnosed, I would, let's say I'm going into the kitchen for a spoon, and I get into the kitchen and then I see the windows open. So I close the window and then I'm like, oh, I should close all the windows in the apartment. So I leave the kitchen and I go start closing all the windows in the rest of the apartment. And then I sit back down and I'm like, I was supposed to do something in the kitchen. So I get up and I go back to the kitchen and then I see a jug that I was supposed to put back in the fridge. So I put the jug in the fridge and I see a snack and I'm getting this snack. And I go back and I sit back down and I'm like, what is happening? Like, and it might take me 15 minutes to be like, I needed a spoon. Like that was the whole, and I've done all these other tasks and I've done all these other things because, the way my therapist described it, at least for me, it's like when you have tabs open in your brain, when you click to a different tab, that other tab isn't still there. It closes. It's gone. And it's not until something jogs the memory of said tab that tab ever resurfaces. And living with that is very different than I forgot to, take the trash out this morning. It's like tasks that should have taken me 5 minutes take me an indefinite amount of time, depending on how long I forget about it. And that's why I talk about it, very openly, that this is something I struggle with, at the same time knowing that a lot of people don't actually know what that means. Like when people say, oh, I have OCD, and it's like, no.
Oh, I got beef.
No, you don't.
I also have beef with that. Oh, I love organization. I'm so OCD. It's like, first of all, grammatically incorrect. I'm so obsessive compulsive disorder. Secondly, like, no, it's just. Yeah.
It's tough. And that's something I think for folks listening who might, if you feel like you've ever said that, don't feel bad. It's become socially normalized to say these things without really any understanding of what it's like for folks to live with different things. And part of the reason why we choose to talk so openly about them is to let you know, like, hey, I can live with this and still have I can still be a yoga teacher. Like,
right.
I've had similar comments of like, how do you focus? And I'm like, well, this is my job. I know. So if you had to get paid to do something, you find a way. But also I take medication for it and it helps. And knowing that I feel comfortable and confident enough to share, like, that is my experience. That's how I cope. There are lots of people who have been formally diagnosed who don't take any sort of medication and have other tools. There's lots of tools in the toolbox, but one of the most important ones being not watering down someone's very real experience. And if you do wonder if you have something, seek out resources. There are resources available for therapy, testing, etc. Because we don't want anybody going undiagnosed because they, don't want to deal with the stigma of, oh shit, I have this thing and I can't really get rid of it. I can just kind of learn how to live with it,
That is true. Yeah, I never want someone to feel like they can't learn and they can't change. And yeah, I mean, as you said, it's become kind of a social normalcy. It's very socially normal to say, oh, I'm so ADHD or I'm so OCD. But I think people can learn, and I never want to stop someone from saying like, I'm so OCD. Hey, maybe I do have OCD, and getting and finding a diagnosis. That was a total ramble statement, but
no, it's important. It's important. It's like both things can be true, right? Like if that's something you're tossing around and you're very aware that is not something you are actually living with, perhaps consider finding another way to express your love of organization, or your forgetfulness, because it is damaging to folks who quite literally have a disability, which is for many, it's these conditions we're talking about are declared disabilities. And so the cool thing is we know that people live with invisible disabilities all the time and we thrive. And also it's important to really know if you're going to talk about something, take the time to read about it a little bit, learn a little bit more. And, if you are concerned about what you're coping with, I think it's important to seek out help. I will say, like, I didn't think I had ADHD when I was diagnosed with it. It was completely presented to me and I was like, everything makes sense. Oh my gosh.
It's so funny. Yeah. When I knew I had anxiety or generalized anxiety disorder, but when I was presented with the fact that I have health anxiety, which is it is classified as OCD, I said, I don't think so. Because I had grown up with this concept of what a form of OCD might look like. And I certainly didn't present that way. And so I do think, our certain stereotypes in general do a disservice to a huge amount of people, concepts, things, etc. But I had a preconceived notion in my mind of what something looked like, and I was totally wrong.
Yes. And that's also an important piece of just like the research that we have. It's evolving. We're getting new data all the time. But a lot of the norms that folks are using to reference what we think a disease might manifest as, they're outdated, or they're almost like the Hollywood effect, where it's like you see this person like closing and shutting doors violently or aggressively, and you're like, oh, okay, that's not me. Similarly with ADHD, most of the studies were done in, folks who were assigned male at birth. So what they knew to be true about how it manifested, we're finding is very different for folks who were assigned female at birth, or, folks who identify as women. And so, yeah, I understand why it went so undiagnosed for so long. And then also dealing with the thing of like, do I want to wear this?
True.
Like, do I want to actually acknowledge this? Or am I going to just be like, nope. And
shutting that door.
Yeah. And, that's also a choice too, to decide like, hey, I'm going to get help so that I can thrive. And there's no shame in that. I think it's really important, and I love that you're talking about this, because one, I don't think I even really consciously thought about the different forms of OCD, the same way that most illnesses manifest in different ways. There isn't a one size fits all. This idea that like as humans, we like things to fit in a really neat little box, right? Like we like to know if something is green or red. Is it cold or is it hot? And so the idea that you can be living with an invisible disease, disability, disorder, and also be a thriving TV personality, people are like, no, doesn't compute. I need to see what you're experiencing in order for it to be real and valid. And so it's the catch-22 of like, once upon a time, if you had any sort of thing that was perceived to be different or off, you got sent away to this asylum. And now we're on the other side of that, where it's like, oh, everybody has that. It's not, or if you do have it, it's like, no, you don't, because you're able to do these things. And I just wonder, what else it'll take for us to become just a little bit more, as a people, willing to see the complexities of this person, this is true and this, not like, they're not conflicting things,
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I love nuance. I love gray areas. And so I do hope that one day we kind of, as a society, become more comfortable with concepts being a little bit more malleable than we think they are. I mean, I agree with you in that, in the past when people know that I have anxiety and I've been in kind of TV environments, sometimes I feel like they're trying to suss me out a little bit. And they're like, when's she going to do her little anxiety thing? And I mean, they don't mean to do that. And I'm not speaking ill upon anyone I've worked with. I've always worked with incredible people, but sometimes I do get the sense that people I've met are trying to figure out, okay, she's this TV lady, but what's the catch? Where's her little anxiety thing? And maybe that's my anxiety talking. Maybe that's me thinking everybody's out to get me. But I'll never really know.
Right.
So I'm just rolling with it.
No, yes, it's like we'll never really know, and also that feeling is valid because people absolutely are. It's like you could say it, and then someone in the comment sections is going to go, "No, you don't."
Right.
Because
thanks.
Right.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Right. Oh, Cheryl, I'm cured.
Yeah.
Just because you told me I'm not, therefore it's gone.
It's gone. Wow. Thanks, Dr. Cheryl.
Dr. See, that's how I want to feed the trolls. Like that's how I want to respond.
Yes.
Like, the smart alecky sort of moment. But yeah, it goes back to the thing that we want to understand. And I feel like that's really what all of this is I'm trying to understand. You're saying you have this thing. I understand anxiety to be this. Help me bridge the gap between what you are saying and what I've seen in movies or what I know to be true. Because we're also dealing with like decades of people with very different experiences.
True.
And, I've heard more than enough times, everybody has anxiety now. And I will say, the pipeline to an ADHD diagnosis, it's usually anxiety or depression or both. Oh, never mind. All of this is this, actually. So in a way, yeah, we all are capable of experiencing anxiety. And also there are different manifestations of it, and different ways to treat it. But you don't get to decide that you being a doctor in the comments is, determining whether or not this person's telling the truth.
True. And I do have a lot of, not sympathy, but I do empathize with people who are curious about things and who don't really know a lot about them, but want to learn more. I joke about, are people trying to like figure me out? I never want people to feel like they can't ask me questions or they can't be curious, because that is how you figure out things. I mean, don't be rude, but I've chosen this life where I have chosen to speak publicly about my identity and my situation in hopes that it helps other people. And, I'm happy to facilitate that.
Mm-hmm. I know this is not a question we talked about ahead of time, but I think it'd be interesting on the flip side of, the heaviness of moving through emotional well-being. How has it been for you working in this what feels like from the outside looking in, very uplifting workspace where you're talking about these really like fun day-to-day lifestyle stories with your current work?
Yeah, it's honestly, since I switched to lifestyle, as we call it, or feature television, it's been great. I mean, obviously there's still stress in the job. It's a job that lives and dies by deadlines, and everything is timed to the last second. And so obviously there's stress, but overall, I get to meet people and hear their stories and talk to interesting people, and they leave, hopefully happy or hopefully intrigued. And so I'm just kind of very aware of how lucky I am to be able to do this job, because a lot of people want to do this job. And I think very cognizant of the fact that I have I'm very privileged to be in the position I'm in. And so I try to keep that in mind. I don't say like, you can't have a bad day, Ellen, because like, look, you're in DC and doing your thing. But I think overall I'm in a job that I really like. I'm working with people I really like, and I get to do something that is creatively fulfilling to me. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's how I feel.
Yes. No, it did. And thank you for that. I think that's a nice way to surmise, like, again, multiple things can be true. Of like, this is a lived experience you're having, and this is a lived experience you're having. And no one thing is 100%, but it reminds me of a saying of like, when your joy is low, your gratitude has to be high. That's something I hold on to deeply of like, I'm having a tough day, but I have these 5 things I can count on that are going well in my life right now. And it's not trying to like, toxic positivity yourself out of the experience, but just remembering that like the same way I'm feeling low right now, this feeling will pass and then good feelings will come. And it's just the cycle,
This too shall pass.
Yes, exactly. So, even with that, the time is passing. So we've made it to our last part of this interview. I know time is flying by. I'm like, oh, so many things we could talk about.
True.
But we've made it to the Well, Wild, and Free Roundup. So just going to walk through our core facets of said podcasts. Ellen, what is something that's keeping you well, keeping you physically and mentally healthy right now?
I would definitely say running. I love to run outside. I equate it to a dog with the zoomies. I am someone who needs to get my zoomies out, and I do that by tying up my running shoes and going outside. It brings me a lot of joy. It keeps me mentally healthy. It keeps me strong. Big fan.
Yes. I love that. And also, like, dogs with the zoomies, I love their commitment to movement. They're like, I gotta move, so I'm gonna move.
And I'm gonna move real fast, and I'm gonna move everywhere.
Yes, exactly. All right. What is keeping you wild? What's something that's keeping you creative and inspired right now?
I would say my writing. I write fiction on the side, and that is something that is just so dear to me. I'm incredibly passionate about it, and I'm pursuing the path to traditional publishing, which can be totally soul-sucking and horrible. But I'm keeping that core passion for that creative pursuit, keeping it very close to me and protecting it. And so that is keeping me wild and creative. And what you said.
I love that. And definitely kudos to you for fighting the good fight. Traditional publishing, for folks listening, it's tough, again, to just keep showing up, keep putting yourself out there. And also, so rewarding when it finally aligns. So kudos to you. Hats off. And then, of course, lastly, what's keeping you free? What's keeping you authentic and liberated right now?
That is a tough one. I mean, there's a lot of things. I think writing could fall into both categories. That's also keeping me it's such a core part of my identity that it just fulfills me in so many ways. And I joke with one of my writer friends, what would we be doing if we didn't write? I truly don't know. I think I would just be a blob who's just like not a blob isn't just like a non thinking. I don't, you know what I mean? Whatever. Just like a thing of Play-Doh or something. I think I would just be not a person. That was a weird way of putting it, but
you lose all your human qualities. Just no longer human. Just Play-Doh.
Exactly. But I think I'll take another stance on this. Prioritizing experiences that I really want to do and prioritizing time with people I love. I was on the West Coast for a long time, and I was on the West Coast for 7 years, and I missed a lot of things in my family's lives and in my friends' lives, and that hit me really hard during the latter half of my time on the West Coast. And so returning to the East Coast was incredibly fulfilling and allowed me to be fully present in the lives of people I love. And so honoring that and maintaining that keeps me, that just fills me up.
That's so beautifully put. And I empathize and relate deeply to it as someone who announced today that I am also moving back to the East Coast. So if you're listening to this and this is news to you, then surprise, I am also leaving the West Coast. It's bittersweet, but it's like Ellen so eloquently put, there's something that's so freeing about being able to be near your loved ones and not miss things. Yeah. It's almost like I feel like I'll be able to move about more freely. And it's been really cool to watch you do it. It's honestly been inspiring. I'm like, okay, I can do this.
Oh, thank you. You can. And I'm excited. I'm excited to have you join me on the East Coast.
Yeah. We'll get to connect in real life again and all the things. But thank you for your vulnerability and how candid you are about just your experience, both creating, producing, and writing, being in front of the camera, being behind the camera. I think it's really important for people to hear from the perspective of the people that they consume news from as real people, beyond just the story you're telling in the segment you're, facilitating. So thank you for that. And is there anything that you want to share? How can folks stay connected with you?
Absolutely. So if people want to find out more about me, I am on TikTok and Instagram under the username Meny, all one word, or you can find out more on my website, www.ellenmeny.com.
Awesome. Ellen, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time and your wisdom.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. And everybody, until next time, stay well, stay wild, stay free.
And don't be a Cheryl.
Oh, and please don't be a Cheryl. The Well, Wild, and Free podcast is a project of Just Breathe Free Wellbeing. It is edited and produced by Eric Hamlet. To stay in touch with us, visit Well, Wild, and Free on Instagram at WellWildFree or at justbreathefree.com/podcast. For sources and information about the show, please visit our show notes.